Chronically Speaking, and I'm super delighted to have a friend and a colleague here, Ursula Mann, which is a caregiver and an expert for patient engagement. And her background lies in pharma. And I'm so excited to have you here, Ursula. We've been talking quite a while now, um, often, and we have a lot of ideas to share. And I would love you to introduce yourself if you don't mind.
Thank you, Roy. Ursula Mann, Patient Voice Partners. I'm the Principal and Chief Patient Officer. We're very excited to be able to engage with different stakeholders. We do projects with healthcare professionals, patient organizations, and patients and caregivers. Doing patient engagement and doing it right with considerations to compliance and privacy are really important to us. As you said, I am a caregiver as well on a few fronts and also a healthcare professional by background. And I did spend a couple of decades in the pharmaceutical industry across commercial, medical education, and medical science liaison roles, as well as market access. And in market access, of course, in a complicated reimbursement system, there's the government relations team and the reimbursement team, as well as stakeholder engagement. And that was a great experience to learn how within our system, as complicated as it is, we can be in situations where a cure is found, Roy, and it might not get to the end user. And that was an eye opening experience as well that really motivated us to make things different and make sure that patients and caregivers could share their experiences both publicly and privately.
Thank you so much for this lovely introduction. So basically, you kind of enabled patient voices to be heard within the industry, right?
Patient voice is really important to us. We like to say at Patient Voice Partners, patient voice changes approach. Because in the absence of patient voice, Roy, as you know, people make a lot of assumptions in healthcare, assumptions as to what patients and caregivers need and want, assumptions as to what are treatment priorities, and assumptions as to what may or may not be barriers to care access. Also, assumptions on the innovation side, what is wanted or needed from a new product, as well as patient reported outcomes. The danger of those assumptions is we can really miss the mark. And instead of driving innovation, we end up doing the opposite and we end up setting up more barriers. We're also not understanding what is the real unmet need for patients and caregivers, as well as uncovering differences across the spectrum with regards to age, gender, sex, ethnicity, rural and
Mhm.
urban living, regional differences, different ethnicities. People have different needs and challenges, and we really want to do a better job of understanding across the board what that is. There has been some positive movement forward with regards to clinical trials. The FDA now does mandate that organizations provide their diversity and inclusion clinical trial plan. However, that's a challenge in clinical trials as well. And we do see situations where clinical trials can be completed and it doesn't hit the mark, necessarily representing the people that have the disease. So there's ongoing work to be done really across the life spectrum with regards to hearing directly from all stakeholders, including patients and caregivers.
Thank you. That's super interesting because I feel it quite often when it comes to innovation that the patient voice is not heard, and of course the caregiver um, when products are being developed. And when we talk about actual therapeutics, it's actually worrying me a lot because if what we're talking about is true, which it is, it means that the medications that are being launched to the market are based on a group of people being participating in clinical trials, but it's not diversified enough. So for me, it's kind of worrisome, not only because of the health equity aspects of it, but also in in regards to genetics, in regards to low income status, in regards to rural communities, and as you mentioned. So for me, it's another yet another barrier to health equity. And before I want to delve into it, I wanted to ask you, like, everybody has a story, and people who choose to do what we do are usually not doing it for the money. They're doing it because of passion. And I wanted to ask you, how did you decide to come up with this idea to start your own company and try to empower patient voices?
Oh, thank you. That's a really thoughtful question. And you had asked me which organizations we work with, and it's very diverse across sectors as well. But taking a step back, what really motivated us to start this, it comes across unmet need and what was happening in the marketplace. We saw firsthand how challenging it was to do patient engagement, but also do it right. And on the personal front, I'm passionate about opportunities for people as a caregiver to share their experiences, but not have to publicly disclose who they are and what they're facing. They may
Mm,
not want their future employer to know what's going on. There are challenges that are incumbent that come along with that. And so, in order to really respectfully be able to engage patients, I was motivated to support on both what I call patient voice public and patient voice private. There are very interesting opportunities for people to share publicly, sometimes through advocacy, what disease they've been diagnosed with, what they're facing, what are their challenges, what are their treatment experiences, what is their quality of life considerations, and what are their goals, to be able to better educate within the healthcare system what would make things more patient centric. However, I realize that's not for every patient and caregiver, either at various points in time or at all. And we've heard from some people that they don't enjoy talking publicly about what they have because it makes them feel like they have to live it more. And
mhm,
sometimes they want to forget that they have it. And having it out there publicly makes them feel like it's out there too much with their neighbor, with their employer, and those aren't conversations that they want to engage on. So I was really motivated to figure out a way to do two things. One was, how can we support patient voice public, where somebody is in the public domain and they can share their experiences and what they're facing? How can we also support patient voice private, where through advisory boards or focus groups and surveys, people can share their experiences and help educate others on what their desires and motivations are with regards to healthcare, but also stay anonymous. I also really realized that patient finding and caregiver finding, matchmaking, so to speak, is a real challenge. And so at Patient Voice Partners, we have Patient Voice Connect, where patients and caregivers can sign up to be matched to paid programs. Short intake form that they fill out, that information is not shared, and that's accessible on the website. So patientvoicepartners.com, people can click I'm a patient caregiver and sign up to be matched to programs. We're really proud of the work that we do. What people always say, what motivates you? Making a difference in healthcare. My kids say we change the world one step at a time. And
yeah.
that's really what motivates me to do what we're doing.
Thank you so much. I think it's really a noble cause because it's much more convenient probably to stay within pharma, right? And to have a nice salary and to have a nice office, and to start something on your own just for the sake of empowering patients and caregivers. I think it's truly commendable, and I really want to know how it like works from the inside, because a lot of people that are patient leaders or patient advocates, they don't really understand what do pharma wants. I have a book, What Do Patient Wants, but we don't really understand how how complex is this process of patient engagement. For us, it's okay, there is a conference, some patient leaders are invited, but we don't understand the other side. Could you maybe shed a bit of light of, like, because of what you're doing is eventually bringing those voice into pharma, but how does it serve pharma? How can it eventually come back to us patients and do something good for us? It will be super cool to learn more about it.
Sure, happy to share. Within the healthcare industry and pharmaceuticals specifically, there is a large understanding that the external environment is quite siloed. Within reimbursement systems, if someone is taking a medication and they don't have to proceed with a surgery, there's cost savings to the system. But those cost savings are not necessarily translated back to the medicine budget that helps support that. And so externally, our healthcare system understandably does have some silos and some challenges within that. In the pharmaceutical industry, there's different silos across regulatory, commercial, medical, market access. Sometimes there's reasons for that, for compliance, different things or teams are working on different things, but there is also people responsible for their area. And so having diverse experiences as to who are the teams, even then within a country or globally, is really helpful. But really to take a step back from that, I think what's really important for healthcare organizations, and I say that broadly, and pharmaceuticals is in that sector, all healthcare companies and all organizations need to think about three things with regards to patient engagement. Why patient engagement, when patient engagement, and how patient engagement. Now, the why is really what I was talking to with regards to false assumptions. There is, if anybody wants to be innovative and make things better in healthcare, that's the why of patient and stakeholder engagement. All stakeholders have a voice. Many years ago, we used to only ask healthcare professionals what patients wanted and thought and needed. And we've realized now, with time, patients and caregivers are becoming more empowered. They want a seat at the table. There's more data ownership. There's more interactions with regards to being a teammate in your own care and having a voice with what you want for that treatment. And for numerous reasons, externally and internally, it's important to be able to engage all stakeholders that work in healthcare across healthcare professional disciplines, across payer systems, across healthcare administration, patient organizations, and patients and caregivers. And in some of my conversations with pharmaceutical companies, there is sometimes a bit of a disconnect as to who they're engaging. Is it only patient organizations or is it also patients and caregivers? Patient organizations are set up in very different ways, where some are volunteer based and they're small organizations, and some are very large organizations with paid staff and people doing different things. So that's really the why healthcare companies need to engage patients. It's to understand the real unmet need and what are challenges across different groups to then figure out how can they work to fill some of those gaps and make healthcare better. The second part is when to engage stakeholders. Sometimes across the silos in the pharmaceutical company, based on rules, this can look a little bit differently. But across a healthcare organization, the real answer as to when to engage stakeholders is all the time. It's not just in clinical research. It's not just at the loss of patent. It's not just one segment in between. You'll often see a bell curve if you're talking about product development. It's actually in the preclinical phase that you should start stakeholder engagement to really understand nationally and globally what's happening for that. And the reason to start so early is to understand what the needs are. Companies spend a lot of money on clinical trials, and it makes me very sad to still hear stories where they've spent much money on a clinical trial and it needs to go in the garbage because their
Yeah.
endpoints were not right. Something wasn't quite right in design. I've personally been in situations where I filled out paperwork as a caregiver and I was like, where did these questions come from? This doesn't
Yeah.
really make sense, let alone caregiver and patient burden on fill out, but they're missing the mark on the what to measure. So understanding what that looks like is really important. That's even true for startups, Roy. We don't want to see situations where somebody comes up with a really amazing product, whether it be health tech or device or product, and then they go looking for the need to figure out where
Yeah.
this fits. There's opportunities to learn very early what are the challenges and barriers. And that leads to really how to engage patient organizations. And that leads me back to patient voice public and patient voice private. We have opportunities to hear from patients and caregivers that are willing to engage with regulators or go public or share their experiences. And I say experiences, not journey, because I've heard from some people they don't like the word journey. They're like, this isn't a fun trip. I didn't wish
Yeah.
for this, but to share their experiences, but also have opportunities to ensure patients and caregivers can stay anonymous, share their experiences, information stays aggregate. And in that way, we're really truly capturing the full amount of patient voice.
Thank you so much. That was a very deep explanation, and I'm trying to put myself, because we are both experts, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a layperson who says, okay, I have a lot of lived experience. I want to contribute something that will help fellow patients, for example, and I actually think that I deserve to make money from my insights because these insights are making profit for somebody at the end, right? So your system allows me to actually contribute in my level of knowledge and expertise in an anonymous or non-anonymous way, and then I can get paid and help science. It sounds super cool, actually.
Yes, I think we've come a long way, Roy, on it within healthcare, understanding that patients and caregivers should be compensated. And how that information is stored and how people are contracting and paid is very important. There are systems in healthcare companies where physicians are processed a certain way. Those processes, given that patients and caregivers is a different level of high risk data, it's personal information, they're not processed as a healthcare professional. There are other considerations for storage and paperwork and regulations that need to be considered. We used to, for many years, and I say we broadly within the healthcare area, no one really understood. And patients and caregivers were always asked to volunteer. I think part of that was because companies didn't necessarily understand or even feel comfortable with the paperwork and know how to process it, what to outsource, what to keep in house. So the easier default was let's just get people to volunteer. I think now we've come a long way to understanding it's partly a respect factor and partly a value factor. Patients and caregivers deserve to be contracted and paid, just like other stakeholders are contracted and paid as well. There are different fair market value calculators, but there is a recognition that this is time for service as well. And there is expertise shared and information shared that's really valuable to the people that are asking it.
Thank you. I've seen one of the calculators yesterday, because I've been asked a lot to do some insight providing work. And what bothered me was one question there, like, is this person a key opinion leader or a subject matter expert? And I want to discuss with you this theme of how do you decide or know or become an expert, a patient expert, caregiver expert, because we all have lived experience that has a lot of worth in terms of the value it can provide. But we're not trained usually to provide it. Like, how do you see this?
Thank you for that question. One of the values at Patient Voice Partners is patients and caregivers are experts because we feel that people are experts in what they want. That's a very simple definition, but it's very simple for people to ask other people, what's most important to you? And what have your biggest challenges been? Now, that's not to say that at various times, Roy, there might be benefits to having certain types of training for patients and caregivers to understand what that means. The healthcare landscape is very complicated, and I certainly don't want to see anybody in a situation where they're put in a position to provide feedback, but not understanding the contextual landscape. Some of the feedback they're providing is not actionable. And
Mhm.
so I think there are opportunities, depending on the project or the situation, to be able to have information shared so that people can understand as much as possible what that contextual landscape is. So, patients and caregivers are experts in what their experiences are, and that's why it's important to have diversity of representation as to what that looks like. I think with time, we'll see more definitions per se pop up. There are also people that do a lot on social media. This is Patient Voice Public, and that looks a little bit different as well. There are also people that go on publications. Now,
Yeah.
we have one situation where we're looking to do a project and a publication. We do have different people with lived experience on it. And of no surprise to me, they don't want their name to appear with name, comma, patient.
Yeah.
And they don't want name, comma, caregiver. They have
Yeah.
chosen to have other things after their name, and we support that. We support the right to stay aggregate and anonymous, but we'll disclose that we had people with lived experience. There currently, as you know, is not a regulated, systematic, consistent approach with regards to publications. There's often good conversation that we should include patients and caregivers within publications, and I certainly agree. But what that looks like from the disclosures may look a little different. And if it is a peer reviewed journal, perhaps there are ways to confirm with a peer reviewed journal that people were participating in a certain way. What I appreciate is that there isn't this forced disclosure where, no, if you're going to participate, you have to say what you are. And what if in the future I have someone's name, comma, realtor? I suspect people are going to say that's the person with lived experience. And that's
Yeah.
going to look a little different than if there is like a healthcare title, so to speak, that they use after. But there certainly are different things happening with regards to engagement. I think what's important is that patients and caregivers do feel respected when they're participating in projects. They do have some ability to learn the contextual situation for providing feedback. They do have the right amount of time to share their experiences, and their experiences are heard and understood as much as possible across diversity of voices, and also that their experiences are current so that we're hearing from people that have recently experienced it, as well as potentially people that have experienced it a little bit earlier, understanding that healthcare as well does change.
So this makes me actually think, thank you, um, that maybe in the future we might see more credentials that patients and caregivers can do in order to be more equal, I would call it, in the eyes of healthcare organizations or professionals. But on the other hand, and this is something that bothers me quite a lot, if you've been through years of illness or caregiving, you already have the credentials, and right now the responsibility, if I'm not mistaken, lies within the hands of the organization who is conducting the trial, right? Or needs this insight. So basically, there is no sitting in a table within equal seats, right? It's somebody decides what they want to get, and the other side is providing it. I know that you're trying to change it, and I want to kind of pinpoint my question. Do you think it's enough for me to have a lived experience to really make a difference within a trial that might lead to a therapy?
I think that anybody that has a healthcare experience, Roy, can have something to share in the right avenue and the right way that they're comfortable sharing it. So, if you have lived experience and you've engaged with the healthcare system, I'm going to bet you have an opinion on what went well and what you would have changed or what you would like to see differently. And I think that the reason many people are interested in sharing patient voice public or patient voice private is because we have this altruistic interest in helping other people have a better experience than we did. That's one of the reasons we launched Patient Voice Connect, to match patients and caregivers to projects, because everybody can help other people perhaps get a faster diagnosis, a better situation, a different care pathway, and better access. We altruistically want to help people. We also want our future care to be better, especially if we know we're going to be re-engaging in the healthcare system. Anybody with a chronic illness is going to be re-engaging in the healthcare system. As a caregiver, I'm managing multiple specialists. We're going to be re-engaging. And so to have future care be a little bit more seamless, a little bit more patient-centric, a little more thoughtful to experiences is really, really helpful. The third reason is it is fair to compensate for time and experiences shared. And so I believe, and we wouldn't have started Patient Voice Partners if this wasn't the case, people do make a difference when they're sharing. What are their challenges, barriers, concerns, desires, hopes? What are they aiming for? And what does good health look like? We regularly hear stories about delays in diagnosis, and that's a real challenge. Delays to diagnosis means delay to getting on treatment. And there are many illnesses where the faster you get a diagnosis and the faster you get a treatment, the better potentially your outcomes can be. And that's true at all age ranges. So I think there is an importance to understanding that there's different opportunities for patients and caregivers to share experiences in ways that fit for them. There is also a lot of movement on the individual front with regards to data.
Hmm.
And different jurisdictions have different mechanisms whereby which patients and caregivers can directly access their own data, which I think is a really interesting situation. Now, the challenge, of course, for people, I'll use Canada as an example, and the young adult that's moving to university. In Canada, different provinces have different levels and different types of access to data. That if you're moving, it doesn't necessarily translate with you. And in some provinces, there is different direct access than in other provinces. But generally speaking, I'm excited about the trend to have more conversations with regards to people's own data being available to them. It's in line with the external environment where patients and caregivers are more empowered in their own healthcare and want to do a little bit of learning and reading on their own to help be a partner in their own care to decide what's best for them and what they would like to be doing and having moving forward.
This make me think about something. So we have a huge movement now for AI in healthcare, and you're talking about taking people's voices and distill it in a very responsible way. But I'm hearing more and more about surveillance of patient experience data. And I wanted to hear your opinion about that because, on the one hand, if we can contribute to public health, and I'm already publishing something that it's on the air, public domain, I don't care it's being used. But
Mhm.
I wanted to ask your opinion about it from regards of governance, in regards of technology assessment, in regards of ethics. What do you think about it?
Oh, that's very thoughtful and a very large question. I think what's most important is if someone is collecting information, Roy, that they're transparently sharing it, how it's going to be used, and who it's going to be used with, and what that really looks like. So that will allow patients and caregivers the choice to participate in different registries or data projects or clinical research or perspective gathering sessions. And so, also, then the opportunity to opt out if they change their mind or they don't want to continue is important as well. And I'm hearing more conversations that center just around that, the opt in and the opt out
Yeah.
mechanism with regards to participating. I think it is important that people understand what it is they're signing up for, and is the information an aggregate or is it individual? And how is that going to be used? And in which jurisdiction is that going to be used as well?
This is really interesting because eventually we are talking about data that is derived directly from people's lives and life experiences. But this data has a potential to really change those people's lives
Mm-hmm.
if it would be treated within the ethical margins, of course, but also processed using the most advanced tools that we have to create better therapies
Mm-hmm.
and optimize patient journeys and processes. And on the one hand, I'm hearing a lot of concerns from patient groups regarding this trend. But on the other hand, we still have gaps in healthcare that we don't have choices other than sometimes collect our own data, assemble our own data, sometimes even analyze our own data. So for me, it's a bit conflicting that the landscape that we're in is running really fast and throwing in the air a lot of terms like AI, patient experience data, and in patient data mining. I'm hearing a lot of those, but eventually, I think that we must always remember there is a human at the end, and this human needs attention and empathy and compassion. And as a caregiver and a former nurse, I think that this is one of the things that fuels you, right?
It sure is. And you mentioned AI, and I will say I'm very passionate about and excited about the future. Genetic testing, artificial intelligence, there's great opportunity for advancement for improved diagnosis and situations in healthcare for patients and caregivers. So I'm excited to hear how things unfold. It certainly does raise a lot of governance questions that I think people are continuing to work through. But what you touched on with regards to the patient centered focus, I think is really important. There are words that are used within healthcare which don't really land that well with patients and caregivers. Patient data mining is one you mentioned. I've heard some feedback. They're like, what does that mean? And what are they doing about it? It sounds like I'm being used.
Yeah.
Another word that gets used within healthcare, but it certainly lands a little bit differently with patients and caregivers, is the word adherence.
Right.
There's lots of conversations like, oh, person is just not being adherent. They're not taking their medication as prescribed. They're not listening. Well, the reality is there are many barriers to quote unquote adherence or
Yeah.
taking your medication as prescribed. Some can be societal barriers, some can be financial barriers, some can be health literacy, which I think is really important to investigate. There can also be differences of health literacy across different diverse groups of people. That looks really different. And understanding what someone's goal is with regards to health or what side effects they're experiencing is really important. It's a word that can easily in healthcare get tossed around, but there's many different buckets that from a patient caregiver perspective really feed into that.
Interesting. I, I keep on coming back in my head to this idea of holy grail of patient engagement because we're always talking about silos and the absolute gap and need to connect those silos or to break them down and at least have some sort of a communication between them. And in my point of view, adherence is only one step of the way that is kind of an end result of a cascade of events that has to do a lot with health equity, health education, patient education, as you mentioned, health literacy. There's so many behavioral things there. But it's again, I feel a bit dumped on the patient, kind of that like they are not listening to us, like this paternalism is still there. While there must be maybe not a holy grail, but a gold standard or a good practice that the other side, the health organizations, can maintain in order to engage us. And because you have 20 years of experience in patient engagement, I wanted to ask you if you can share one good practice that you think can really improve it.
Well, that's a great question. I think from a healthcare organization standpoint, and this is also true of patient organizations that have been supported as well, is stepping back and asking yourself the question. This is true for public agencies also. Have viewpoints of patients and caregivers been incorporated into projects? And
Hmm.
at what stage? Is it at the beginning, middle, end, and rinse and repeat? So is it ongoing? Is there ongoing engagement and are viewpoints included? Are the viewpoints current and are they diverse? Do we have representation from who is experiencing these challenges with regards to voices around the table? And this will subsequently allow organizations to understand emerging trends, what are strategies to be able to support unmet needs, and adapt accordingly. And I think what's really important is starting the conversation and continuing the conversation in a respectful manner. We don't want to have situations where it's a one and done ask. We're ticking the box. We've asked people, not sure what to do with the feedback. How do we quantify qualitative needs of patients? And what does that really mean? We don't know what to do with it, so we're going to move on. So, ongoing, early, and regular conversations, I think, are really important with open communication and understanding what are priorities.
Thank you. I want to ask you if my information is reaching somebody like yourself or a platform like you founded, like if I'm now taking part in this process, how does it look like, if it's kind of this information is being chewed and digested and being analyzed, like how does it look like on the other hand, because like on the other side, because I personally, of course, I know these processes, but for people who are listening to us, I'm not sure that everybody knows exactly how does my insight about my feeling or experience can help in developing a medication. Can you explain to us how does it work?
Well, that's a really good point, and it'll come down to what you share as well. So, for example, if you share information on challenging of getting diagnosed, well, that could ultimately help better understand that there wasn't access to testing that would have helped you get diagnosis faster. And maybe there are differences across regions or populations with regards to the access to testing or the access to healthcare. We know there's a large number of people that don't have a regular family doctor. So, what does that look like? And are there nurse practitioners or other people where there can be regular care? So, that's on the getting diagnosed front. With regards to the treatment front, that can look a little bit differently. In preclinical testing many years ago, there was a really large device that was developed to transmit medication. And people were not asked very early on, but when they finally were, people said, I don't want to use this large device. I think this looks like an adult situation with a preferred friend that I would like some private time with, not a medication situation. This makes me really uncomfortable. So, back to the drawing board, that looked a little bit differently. Now, people developing it were simply coming up with a system, but patients said that's not how I'm interpreting what this looks like. So, on the product development device situation, it can be something as potentially simple as, how would I use this and transport it and store it? Is refrigeration needed? I don't have access to that. Am I having to travel to a center and I'm having to stay there for 5 days? And I'm not going to pick that treatment because that's not really working for me in my situation. And what if somebody doesn't have a caregiver to go with? So there's different things with regards to choice of treatment that can factor in that people could share feedback on. There's also treatment experiences. And within treatment experiences, that interest in innovation to make things different, understanding the unmet need, which many individuals could share, and that information could be shared and looked at to say, gosh, if we could find a situation that would help address this, that would really help a large number of people. So, although to an individual patient or caregiver, it can seem like potentially a simple little thing that you're sharing and you're like, does this really make a difference? We believe it can and it does. And so we've seen situations where different decisions are made across patient organizations, healthcare companies, public agencies based on feedback. And it takes brave people to share patient voice public and patient voice private to say, these are my experiences and this is what I'm really looking for. Quality of life can look very different. For different groups, it could potentially be a return to work or stay at work. For somebody else, it might be the ability to engage with grandchildren or travel or have days where you have enough energy to volunteer. And that can be very important to be able to share what's important across different groups.
Thank you so much. It leads me to a question I have regarding our title. We have a mutual title. We're both chief patient officers in our own organizations. Do you think that the presence of a patient in residence or a chief patient officer might maybe save some time, money, and efforts, or change the course of a huge mistake like you described that might cost hundreds of millions of dollars to the company who develops? Like, if we have somebody on the team that is in charge with bringing patient voices, does it help, or is it going to end up as a yet another, poster boy or girl to have a nice to have title?
I think what you just said and the responsibility of bringing other patient voices is really important because, regardless of someone's title at a healthcare organization, if they're chief patient officer or stakeholder engagement or patient advocacy, or those are different roles with different responsibilities. And I think it can be challenging for somebody that has personal experiences to be put in a role or a program or a project in any sector and be expected to speak on behalf of all patients and caregivers. That inherently could miss the mark in other areas.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's value to starting the conversation, perhaps with a smaller group. But what you said, I think, is really important, regardless of role title, making sure that we're hearing from more and diverse voices to get a snapshot and capture across the board. I was in a conversation yesterday and it was centered around exactly this. What if we have one healthcare professional or one person with lived experience from X region? Is that enough? and the pressure that's put on that person. Like,
Right.
how many people are they supposed to speak on behalf of? So instead, perhaps, is it representation of different areas and several diverse voices that could come together? We know at healthcare organizations, diverse teams are stronger. And it is easy to fall into the trap of saying we're just going to have a team where everyone thinks the same, or we're just going to ask a couple people. But there is strength and power to that diversity of perspective to come up with the best possible solution, to be the most thoughtful in addressing unmet needs, to drive creativity and innovation,
Mm-hmm.
and cannot come up with what I like to call a win-win-win. It's not just a win-win anymore. The table stakes are raised, and I'm excited about that. I want it to be a win for patients and caregivers. I want it to be a win for the patient organization, healthcare company, public agency, healthcare system, and a win for the organizations that are trying to do all the support with regards to patient voice and what does this look like to bring stakeholders together and better understand what.
This is super insightful, and it's actually make me kind of think more about this profession that we are pioneering, because you always feel the weight on your shoulders, and I'm starting to realize, especially after talking with you for a few weeks now, we're having our weekly professional chat, that it's not about being a patient advocate as a chief patient officer. It's more about creating catalyzation of change, creating a framework, creating kind of a breathing ground for those synthesis of other opinion, diversity, patient-led innovation, and so forth. So this is really insightful to me to kind of broaden this profession, because eventually it can be a very lonely journey to be patient advocates or caregivers or patient leaders or patient experts, because it's not like a professional network that we are logging into a group in LinkedIn for CEOs and there are 200,000 CEOs. This journey might be a bit lonelier, and I think that what you're doing is incredible, because you're using technology to bring a lot of people together and their voices and their needs. But on the other hand, you're kind of always remembering where you came from in terms of your professional life, as nurses are the care managers of patients, and in some cases, case managers. And I think you took this compassion and empathy and holistic view to what you're doing today. So thank you so much. I think that I'm learning a lot from you in general. And do you have anything to add before I ask you my final question? Likewise. And the way I'm ending up all of my podcasts, even in other themes, is to ask my guests to ask me a question, whatever they want. It can be personal, it can be professional. I think it's kind of spice things up a bit towards the end of the episode. Wow, it's been such a tough week with the guest questions. Like, every question is so spot on. To be honest, and I'll be as vulnerable and honest as I can, I think I'm trying to save myself through trying to save or help other people. One of my greater motivations in this process is to prevent people to go through the nightmare I've been go through. And when you're going through such length of an illness, you want people to not suffer. I think you develop more compassion and more empathy and more sensitivity. And I think, I think that this for me is the difference, to prevent others from suffering and eventually to empower them, and through that maybe to empower part of myself. And thank you so much for asking such a brave question. Ursula, it's been as usual lovely, but we're not always recording our conversation. Maybe we should, because I think there's so much to learn from our shared insights, and I'm learning a lot about the industry side, and from your vast experience. And I wanted to thank you for the work that you're doing, because sometimes, in professional settings, people are just like very courteous with each other. But I really want to thank you for devoting your life to helping patients. And people don't understand that well enough, that sometimes being a caregiver, it's even harder. I've been in both sides, and it's a lot of sacrifice, and it's a very, very lonely journey. And I really thank you on a personal level for being a caregiver and for devoting your life for helping patients. And I really thank you for taking the time being here with me. And I'm looking forward for more conversations. Thank you. And for our listeners and viewers, thank you so much for taking the time. I will link Ursula's projects, Patient Partner Voices, the private and the public one, and the agency that she founded that works with different stakeholders within healthcare and the health industry. And you're more than invited to follow her and her company's work. It's super insightful, and there are a lot to learn from them. Thank you again, Ursula, and see you guys next week.